a billionaire's best-kept secret. Hello, mystery and betrayal lovers. If you're ready to dive into a story that has it all, hit like and subscribe to our channel. The truth that is about to be revealed will take your breath away. The soft hum of a Gulfstream G650ER's twin Rolls-Royce engines was the sound of absolute power for billionaire Richard Vance. It wasn't just a sound, it was the symphony of his success, the soundtrack to a perfect betrayal, a secret flight that would take him to a remote private island in the Bahamas with his young, dazzling mistress, Sophia. The fantasy of the vacation was already a taste in his mouth, the flavor of vintage Dom Perignon, the warmth of the tropical sun on his skin, and the unmistakable victory of having it all, without the strings he thought he had left on the ground. But some secrets, like betrayals, have a habit of taking on a life of their own. Richard Vance was about to learn a brutal and ultimate lesson. At 40,000 feet, there is nowhere to run when the woman you've betrayed is not only the mother of your future child, but also the architect of your own ruin. The black limousine slid with a reverent silence through the private gates of Teterboro Airport, a gesture of deference reserved only for royalty or immense wealth. Inside, 50-year-old Richard adjusted the cuff of his bespoke Brioni suit. The Patek Philippe on his wrist, a grand and complicated tourbillon, was a subtle but unmistakable statement of his status. He didn't just buy time, he controlled it, manipulated it, bent it to his will. Beside him, 28-year-old Sophia was the picture of vibrant youth. Her scarlet dress was a bold slash of color against the car's monochromatic luxury interior, a shout of passion in contained sophistication. Sophia's laugh, a crystalline sound he had found intoxicating for the last 6 months, filled the space. She ran a perfectly manicured hand through her platinum blonde hair, a gesture that was both nervous and theatrical. "I still can't believe this is real, Richie," she breathed, her eyes wide, as she took in the jet's sleek, streamlined silhouette, his jet, sitting on the tarmac. The Gulfstream G650ER, registered as NRCH1, was his pride and joy, a $65 million testament to his dominance in the world of green technology and aggressive corporate takeovers. "Get used to it, darling," Richard murmured, his voice a low, deep rumble. He placed a hand on her knee, his thumb drawing slow, possessive circles. "This is our world now. Our world." The words tasted of honey and power on his tongue. He had built this world from nothing. Vance Holdings had revolutionized energy storage, an achievement that made him not only obscenely wealthy, but also revered. A visionary, a titan, and titans, he firmly believed, were entitled to certain privileges. Sophia was one of them. She was exciting, uncomplicated, and most importantly, she wasn't Isabella. The thought of Isabella, his wife, was like a pinprick in the balloon of his euphoria. He pictured her back at their palatial estate, likely overseeing the finishing touches on the nursery. She was 7 months pregnant, expecting their first child, a boy. Do you think Richard felt genuine remorse, or had power completely clouded his conscience? Let me know your opinion in the comments. Isabella was brilliant, poised, and the solid foundation on which he had built his success. She was his partner in every sense of the word, a woman of old money and sharp intelligence who had seen his potential when he was little more than an ambitious upstart. But she had become predictable. Her quiet strength, once a comfort, now felt like a judgment. The pregnancy, which should have been a jubilation, felt like the closing of a chapter, the final nail in the coffin of his youth and freedom. Sophia was his escape. She looked at him with unadulterated adoration, not the knowing, complicit gaze his wife had. With Sophia, He wasn't a husband or a soon-to-be father. He was simply Richard Vance, master of the universe. The limousine pulled to a stop at the foot of the jet's stairs. A uniformed flight attendant, a kind-faced woman named Lucy, greeted them with a practiced smile. "Good evening, Mr. Vance. Ms. Beltran, welcome aboard." Richard nodded curtly, a hand on Sophia's lower back, guiding her up the stairs. The interior was his sanctuary, a bespoke space of cream leather, polished mahogany, and brushed chrome. The air was cool and smelled faintly of leather and clean air, a sterile perfection that he controlled. "Champagne?" he offered, gesturing to the crystal flutes already waiting in a silver bucket. "Always," Sophia chirped, sinking into one of the plush captain's chairs. She kicked off her Christian Louboutin heels and wiggled her toes, a picture of carefree indulgence. She was playing a role, that of the pampered mistress, and she did it exceptionally well. He had met her at a tech gala. She was a young marketing executive at a rival firm, and her ambition was as naked and appealing as her smile. She knew what she wanted, and he was happy to provide it in exchange for her youth and her devotion. As he popped the Dom Perignon, the sound resonated softly in the cabin, and he allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. The deal he was flying to the Bahamas to close was the biggest of his career. He was to meet with Alastair Sterling, a reclusive British magnate, to finalize a merger that would create an energy giant. The private resort island was a neutral, luxurious ground for the final handshake. Taking Sophia was a reckless indulgence, a victory lap before the race was officially won. Isabella believed he was in Zurich for a banking conference. The lie had rolled off his lips as easily as breathing. Richard poured the bubbly liquid, its pale gold catching the soft cabin light. He handed a glass to Sophia, their fingers brushing. The contact was electric, a jolt of the illicit high that had been missing from his life. He raised his own glass. "To new horizons," he said, his voice like silk. "To us?" she replied, her blue eyes gleaming. They clinked glasses. The jet's doors sealed shut with a pneumatic hiss, shutting out the world. The engines spooled up, their low whir escalating to a powerful roar. Richard leaned back, the jet's motion as it began to taxi feeling like a confirmation, a forward surge that matched his own life's trajectory. Everything was in place. He was in control. The flight plan was set. The destination was paradise, and the woman beside him was beautiful and compliant. He was Icarus, but he had built his wings from carbon fiber and titanium, and he had no intention of flying too close to the sun. He owned the sun. The Gulf Stream accelerated down the runway, a torrent of raw power pressing them back into their seats. With one final escalator elegant lift, they left the ground behind, ascending into the dark canvas of a night sky dusted with stars. Below, the lights of the city spread out like a carpet of scattered diamonds. Richard took a sip of his champagne. It was perfect. Everything was utterly and impeccably perfect. The ascent to 41,000 feet was a smooth, silent affair, a testament to the Gulf Stream's engineering. Below, a thick blanket of clouds obscured the land, creating the illusion that they were utterly alone, suspended in a private universe of mahogany and champagne. Richard had just finished regaling Sophia with a story of a corporate takedown, embellishing the details to magnify his own cunning. She was listening raptly, her head tilted, her lips parted in a mix of awe and excitement. It was a performance he had perfected over the years, and she was the perfect audience. "And that," he concluded, allowing a small, self-satisfied smile to play on his lips, "is how I ended up owning the patent on the entire line of hydrocells." "You're such a shark, Richie," Sophia said, her voice breathy. "A beautiful, brilliant shark." She leaned over the console separating them, intending to kiss him. It was at that precise moment that a soft, feminine voice cut through the quiet hum of the cabin. "He certainly is, though I always thought of him as more of a wolf." Richard froze, the champagne flute halfway to his lips. The blood ran cold in his veins. Sophia recoiled, her face a mask of confusion. Slowly, as if in a nightmare, Richard turned his head. The main cabin of the G-150ER was divided into sections. He and Sophia were in the forward seating area. Farther back, past the galley, was a more private stateroom. From the shadows of this rear section, a figure emerged. It was Isabella. She moved into the light with a quiet, deliberate grace that seemed to mock the frantic hammering of his heart. She was dressed in a simple but elegant cream cashmere tunic and matching pants that fell gracefully over her 7-month baby bump. Her honey blonde hair was pulled into a simple, elegant bun, and her face, though pale, was serene. She wore no makeup, but she didn't need it. Her beauty was of a different kind than Sophia's. It was an architectural beauty, rooted in the fine structure of her bones and the intelligence of her clear gray eyes. And it was those eyes that were fixed on him, now with a gaze that was not one of rage, not of hysteria, but of something far more terrifying. A placid observation, as if she were studying an interesting but disappointing specimen under a microscope. "Isabella," Richard mouthed, his voice a choked whisper. The name felt foreign on his tongue, an artifact from a different life. How are you here?" "How are you here?" Sophia blurted out, her mouth agape. The color had drained from her face, leaving her looking garish and cheap in her scarlet dress. She looked from Richard's horrified expression to the serene, pregnant woman who had appeared as if by magic. "Hello, Richard," Isabella said, her voice perfectly even. She didn't even glance at Sophia, a dismissal more profound than any insult. She moved to one of the empty captain's chairs opposite them, lowering herself into it with the careful deliberation of an advanced pregnancy. "I thought you were off to Zurich for a banking conference. It appears the pilot has taken a rather significant detour. The Bahamas, I hear, are lovely this time of year." The cabin, once a cocoon of illicit pleasure, instantly became a high-altitude pressure cooker. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with unspoken accusations and the deafening silence of Richard's lies. He tried to reach for an explanation, a foothold, but his mind was a slippery surface of panic. How did she know? How did she get on the plane? The flight manifest, the crew. He controlled every aspect of his life with meticulous precision. This was impossible. "A last-minute change of plans, you see," he stammered, the words sounding weak and pathetic even to his own ears. "A meeting with Sterling." He moved. Alistair Sterling. Isabella's eyebrow rose slightly. "How fascinating. I was not aware his portfolio included associates of Ms. Beltran's caliber." She finally allowed her gaze to flick over to Sophia, a swift, dismissive scan that took in the too-bright dress, the shocked expression, the aura of being completely out of place. Sophia visibly shrank in her seat, suddenly looking less like a temptress and more like a little girl caught playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. "Isabella, please," Richard began, his voice low and urgent. "This is not the time or the place." "On the contrary, Richard," she replied, her voice losing none of its glacial calm. She folded her hands over her swollen belly, a gesture that was both maternal and regal. "I can't think of a more perfect place. At 40,000 feet, with nowhere to run, no meetings to rush to, no calls to take, no lawyers to hide behind. Just us, a captive audience." Lucy, the flight attendant, appeared at that moment, her face a carefully blank mask. She looked at Isabella alone. "Would you like anything, Mrs. Vance? Perhaps a little chamomile tea?" "That would be lovely, Lucy. Thank you." Isabella said, with a small, elegant smile. The casual exchange was a dagger to Richard's gut. Mrs. Vance. The crew knew. They were her accomplices. He looked at the cockpit door, feeling a surge of impotent rage. His pilot, Robert, had been with him for over a decade. He had been betrayed by his own staff. How? He asked, the single word encompassing a universe of questions. Isabella's gaze returned to him, her expression unreadable. It appears you're operating under a misapprehension, Richard. You think of this as your jet. You forget that when we restructured our assets 2 years ago, I had my name added to the G650's title. It is, technically, as much my plane as it is yours. I don't need permission to board it. I just need to make a call. The floor opened up for a second time for him. A psychological plunge far more jarring than the jet's initial ascent. The asset restructuring, of course, an exercise in tax law esoterica that his lawyers and Isabella, with her sharp financial mind, had overseen. He had barely paid attention, signing the documents she put in front of him, trusting her implicitly. The irony was a bitter pill. His own complacency, his dismissive trust in her quiet competence, had become the weapon she was now wielding against him. He was trapped, caught in a multi-million-dollar prison of his own making, with his pregnant wife as his jailer and his mistress as his cellmate. The flight to paradise had just become a slow, agonizing descent into hell. The chamomile tea arrived in a delicate porcelain cup, its steam curling in the cool cabin air. Isabella cradled it in her hands, her movements serene and unhurried. The contrast between her composure and the frantic chaos in Richard's mind was dizzying. His thoughts raced, cycling through denial, rage, and a creeping sense of dread. He was a man accustomed to controlling every variable, to manipulating every system. But in this equation, Isabella was an unknown, a variable he had dismissed and filed away as a constant. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in months. He saw the new, faint lines of fatigue around her eyes, the subtle shift in her posture to accommodate the new life she carried. And for a fleeting, painful moment, he was transported back to the past. He remembered their beginnings. They had met at a charity event long before the name Vance Holdings meant anything. He was a brash engineer with a revolutionary idea and a failing startup. She was the daughter of a banking tycoon, a fresh-faced college graduate who saw past his threadbare suit and into the core of his ambition. She didn't just invest her family's money. She had invested herself. She had spent all-nighters with him, poring over schematics and business plans, her brilliant mind refining his raw vision. He remembered the thrill of their shared purpose, the electricity of building something together. He remembered falling in love with her intellect as much as her understated elegance. She was his partner, his confidant, the one who had made him king. Their marriage wasn't just a union of hearts. It was the merger of two formidable forces. When had that changed? He couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. It was a slow erosion, a gradual drifting apart, carried by the currents of his own success. As the company grew, so did his ego. The more the world revered him as a solitary genius, the more he began to believe it. He started seeing Isabella's contributions not as a partnership, but as simple support. Her advice became an annoyance. Her caution became pessimism. He had started to feel confined. The empire they built together began to feel like his cage, and she, its gentle but firm guardian. Sophia was the antithesis of that. She demanded nothing of his mind, only of his wallet and his attention. She was a reflection, not a partner, a soft, flattering mirror that showed him the powerful, unattached man he wanted to be. "I imagine you have questions," Isabella said, her voice pulling him from his reverie. She took a delicate sip of her tea, her eyes never leaving his. Before Richard could answer, Sophia, who had been unnervingly silent, finally found her voice. It was reedy, laced with a tremor of fear and humiliation. "Who do you think you are?" she spat, directing her words at Isabella. It was a pathetic attempt to reclaim some semblance of power, to re-establish her position. "You can't. I am his wife," Isabella interjected, her tone as sharp and cold as breaking ice. She still didn't look directly at Sophia, addressing her as one might address a bothersome insect. "And the mother of his child. The question is, who are you? Besides, of course, an entry on a discretionary expense account that I'm about to freeze." The calculated cruelty of the remark hit with pinpoint precision. Sophia blanched, her bravado crumbling to dust. She was not a player in this game. She was the board itself, something to be wiped clean. She opened her mouth to speak again, then snapped it shut, looking at Richard with pleading eyes, begging him to intervene, to defend her. But Richard was paralyzed. To defend Sophia would be an admission of everything. To side with Isabella was impossible. He was stuck in a no-man's land he had created for himself. He chose a third option: evasion. "Isabella, this is a business trip. My relationship with Ms. Beltran is professional." The lie was so audacious, so insulting to her intelligence, that a flicker of something, was it amusement or pity, crossed Isabella's face. A professional relationship that requires a 10-hour flight to a private resort in the Bahamas and a scarlet dress? She retorted, her voice dry. Is she taking notes, Richard? Or is her role more hands-on? The barely veiled vulgarity was so uncharacteristic of her that it left him stunned. The Isabella he knew was above such things, always maintaining a veneer of perfect propriety. This was a new Isabella, one who had shed her customary self-control. "Let's not stoop to flimsy lies," she continued, her voice hardening. "I know everything. I've known for 4 months, since that gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where you spent more time with her than you did with your own wife. You are not as subtle as you think, Richard. Your arrogance makes you careless." 4 months. She had known for 4 months. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. He thought of all the clandestine dinners, the whispered phone calls, the carefully constructed alibis. It had all been a farce played for an audience of one who was never truly fooled. She had been watching him, letting him weave his web of lies, all while carrying their son. The depth of her patience, her silence, was terrifying. It was not the patience of a victim. It was the patience of a hunter. His mind reeled. He had underestimated her so profoundly that it amounted to a strategic error of catastrophic proportions. He had seen her as a domestic accessory, a part of the beautiful, static background of his life. He had forgotten the mind as sharp as a razor that had helped him dissect competitors and navigate hostile takeovers. He had forgotten the woman who could command a boardroom with a quiet word, who could see 3 moves ahead while everyone else was still focused on the first play. He had forgotten that the person who helped you build an empire knows exactly where all the load-bearing walls are, and exactly how to make the whole thing come crashing down. The turbulence that suddenly rocked the plane felt like an external manifestation of his internal state. The jet bucked, and a champagne glass slid off the console, shattering on the plush carpet. Sophia let out a small shriek, but Isabella didn't even flinch. She simply held her cup of tea, her hand perfectly steady, her eyes locked on his. "It's just a little rough weather," she said, her calm a stark indictment of his own unraveling. "It'll pass. The real storm, Richard, is the one we're about to face." The jet leveled out, the seatbelt sign clicked off, but the oppressive tension in the cabin only intensified. Richard felt exposed, his authority stripped away layer by layer. He was no longer the master of this domain. He was a guest a defendant in a trial being held at cruising altitude. He needed to regain control, to steer the conversation back to familiar territory. Business. That was his ground. "You mentioned Alistair Sterling," he said, forcing a semblance of his usual boardroom tone. "This merger is critical, Isabella. It's the culmination of 5 years of work. Whatever our personal issues, they cannot be allowed to jeopardize the future of Vance Holdings." He was trying to reframe the situation, to position himself as the guardian of their shared legacy, implying her actions were emotional and reckless. Isabella set down her teacup with a gentle clink. "Project Vanguard," she said, naming the top-secret merger. "A deal that would make our company the undisputed global leader in sustainable energy. A legacy for our son. Yes, I'm intimately familiar with it." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "I'm also familiar with the revised term sheet you submitted to Sterling's people last Tuesday, the one you submitted without consulting the board. Or me." The blood in Richard's veins ran cold. The revised term sheet was his masterpiece, a piece of corporate maneuvering so audacious it bordered on deception. It included a clause buried deep in the appendices that would grant him unprecedented personal control over the newly formed entity. It would, in effect, dilute the power of the existing board members, including the seat held by Isabella's family trust, completely marginalizing her influence. It was a power grab, a final move to make the empire truly his, and his alone. Only his personal lawyer and his most trusted CFO knew the details. "How did you—" he started, but he couldn't finish. "You have a CFO, Richard? I have a family office that has been managing billions for 3 generations. Your man is good at hiding numbers. My people are better at finding them," she said simply. "I believe the clause in question was Section 11, subsection C, the one that reassigns preferred shareholder voting rights in the event of a leadership restructuring. A clever, if somewhat transparent, attempt to gut my position post-merger. You planned to divorce me after the deal was signed, didn't you? Leave me with a generous sum, but no real power in the company I helped you build." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart that pierced his defenses. He had no response. He had been so consumed by his own cleverness, so sure of his intellectual superiority, that he never imagined she would be watching. He had been playing checkers, while she had been playing 3-dimensional chess. Sophia, sensing the shift from a domestic squabble to something far more complex and dangerous, looked between them with wide, confused eyes. The words merger, term sheet, and voting rights were from a language she didn't understand. She only understood that the ground beneath her own ambitions was cracking. "But that's not the most interesting part," Isabella continued, her voice dropping slightly, drawing them in. "The most interesting part is Alistair Sterling himself. He's a notorious recluse, an old-school titan. He values honor and integrity above everything else. He's famous for being protective of his family name and his legacy. He once ruined a billion-dollar deal because he discovered the other company's CEO was having an affair with his son's wife." She let that information settle in the silent cabin. The engines hummed on, indifferent. Richard felt a wave of nausea. He had known Sterling was a traditionalist, but his research team had never uncovered such a specific anecdote. It was a detail only someone with deep connections in that rarefied world would know. A detail that Isabella, with her lineage and connections, would know. "I took the liberty of calling Alistair this morning," Isabella said, her voice now light, almost conversational. "We had a lovely chat. I've known his daughter Penelope from our boarding school days in Switzerland. We spoke of old times. We spoke of our children. And then I told him I was afraid I couldn't attend the celebration dinner he was hosting on the island because my husband's +1 had created a scheduling conflict. Richard felt the last remnants of his composure shatter. The air left his lungs. It was over. The deal was dead. 5 years of work, the crowning achievement of his career, unraveled in a single phone call. He had flown into a meticulously laid trap. The meeting with Sterling wasn't a sign. It was going to be his execution. "You couldn't have," he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. "You wouldn't. You've just torpedoed the value of your own shares, our future, everything." "My future is secure, Richard, and so is my son's," she corrected him gently. "But you're right. I didn't leave it there. That would have been messy, destructive. And I am a builder, not a wrecker. So I made Alistair a counter-proposal." She leaned in slightly, her gray eyes burning with an intensity he hadn't seen in years. It was the look she used to have when they were on the verge of a breakthrough. The look that told him she saw the way forward when he only saw roadblocks. "A proposal," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "For a partnership, one built on trust, transparency, and a shared vision. One that removes the compromised, unreliable, and morally bankrupt element from the equation. One that puts me, as the majority shareholder of the Vance Family Trust, in charge as interim CEO to oversee the merger." The cabin tilted. The world had just been remade, and he was no longer at its center. He stared at her, at this woman he thought he knew, at this woman he had dismissed as a quiet domestic creature. She hadn't just exposed his affair. She hadn't just ruined his deal. She had hijacked it. She had stolen his company, his legacy, his future, all while smiling politely and sipping chamomile tea. The shark had been outmaneuvered. The wolf had been caught in a trap of his own making, and he was still 30,000 feet off the ground. The story of Richard and Isabella teaches us a brutal lesson about arrogance and underestimation. What would you have done in Isabella's place? Do you think it was revenge or an act of survival? Let me know your opinion in the comments. If this story has captured you, hit like and share it with a friend so they don't miss out. The silence that followed Isabella's revelation was heavier than the weight of the atmosphere outside. It was a vacuum that sucked all the air and arrogance out of Richard. He stared at her, seeing not just his wife, but a master strategist who had anticipated his every move and laid a counter-strategy of devastating precision. The affair, the secret clause, his trip to the Bahamas. He thought they were his secret plays, but they were nothing more than the predictable moves of a pawn that she had been tracking on the board. "Interim CEO," he finally managed to say, the words tasting like ash. "The board will never approve it. They're loyal to me." A sad smile touched Isabella's lips. "Loyalty is a transactional commodity, Richard. You, of all people, should know that. Your loyalty to the board was conditional on your ability to deliver profit and power. By attempting to disenfranchise them with your secret term sheet, you invalidated that contract. As for their loyalty to you personally, I wonder." I sent a copy of that term sheet, along with a summary of my conversation with Sterling, to every single board member an hour ago. I suspect their loyalty is currently undergoing a rather rapid recalculation. He felt his world constrict, the walls of the luxurious cabin closing in. He had been completely, utterly outplayed. He searched for an angle, a weakness, any leverage. He found none. It was Sophia who broke the spell. Her fear had finally curdled into desperate, resentful rage. She was no longer a pawn. She was a victim. And she knew it. "This is what you do, isn't it?" she shrieked, her voice shrill. "You sit back and play the long-suffering saint while you plot to ruin him. You're pathetic." She turned to Richard, her eyes burning. "Don't let her do this. Richie, fight her. This is your company, your life." Her words, meant to rouse him, had the opposite effect. They sounded hollow and foolish, the comprehension of a war whose scale she couldn't grasp. Richard didn't even look at her. His focus was entirely on Isabella. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Is this all about the affair? Revenge, Isabella?" He needed to believe it was something as simple as jealousy, a crime of passion. To accept that it was a cold, calculated response to his business betrayal was to accept his own total defeat. Isabella's gaze softened for the first time, a flash of the woman he once knew shining through the icy facade. "Do you know me so little, Richard? After all these years, you think this is about her?" She gestured vaguely in Sophia's direction without looking at her. "She is a symptom, not the disease. The disease is your belief that you can have everything without consequence, that the rules of decency and partnership don't apply to you." She leaned back, resting a hand on her belly. "For months I've watched you. I've watched you lie to me, your partner, the woman carrying your child. Then I found you were also lying to our board, the people who entrusted you with their fortunes. And you were lying to Alistair Sterling, a man whose trust you needed. And through it all, you were lying to yourself, pretending you were still the hero of your own story. A wolf who eventually eats his own pack to survive. I couldn't let you devour what we built together. I couldn't let you poison our son's legacy before he was even born." Her words weren't accusatory. They were a diagnosis delivered with the calm, detached authority of a doctor giving a terminal prognosis. He had no defense because she was right. His arrogance had become a cancer that was metastasizing to every part of his life, and she was performing a radical, painful surgery to save the larger organism. "What you've done is corporate espionage," he said weakly, grabbing onto one last legal life raft. "It's illegal." "Is it?" she countered. "As a co-owner of this jet, I have the right to be on it. As a board member and major shareholder, I have the right to communicate with other board members on company matters. As an acquaintance of Alistair Sterling, I have the right to talk to him about his business dealings, especially when they directly impact my own assets. I have been very, very careful, Richard. My legal team is far better than yours. You should know. I'm the one who hired them for you." Every sentence was another slamming door. He looked around the cabin, this gilded cage he had built, and saw it for what it was, a monument to an empty man. The polished wood, the soft leather, the silent hum of the engines, it all felt like a mockery now. He finally turned to Sophia. He saw the desperate hope in her eyes, the last belief that the powerful man she had attached herself to would save her. And in that moment, all he felt was a profound, crushing weariness. She was a complication. He no longer had the energy to handle a symbol of the cheap, easy pleasures he had chosen over the deep, challenging partnership he had thrown away. "Get her a drink," he murmured to the empty air, not caring if the flight attendant heard. He couldn't look at her anymore. "She can ask for her own," Isabella said quietly, but with an unmistakable tone of finality. "From this moment on, Richard, you are no longer in a position to give orders on this plane, or anywhere else." The full weight of his new reality settled on him. He wasn't just losing a deal or a company. He was losing his identity. Richard Vance, the Titan, the visionary, the master of the universe, was gone. In his place, there was just a man, a cheater, a failure, trapped in a metal tube, flying through the stratosphere with the two women who represented the ruin of his past and the desolation of his future. And outside the window, the first light of dawn was beginning to break, promising a new day he would have no part in commanding. What did you think of the grand finale of this story? Richard's journey is over, but Isabella's is just beginning. Was her revenge fair, or was it too harsh?
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.